Matt Eberflus has to be the first coach in NFL history to simultaneously be on the hot seat and the betting favorite for NFL Coach of the Year. I mean, come on, how ridiculous is this?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On the show today, we look at where Matt Eberflus stands with the Chicago Bears right now, where he's being deemed on the hot seat by some folks, and at the same time, our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook have him as the betting favorite or co-betting favorite for NFL Coach of the Year. And I think that's such an interesting, funny dynamic that he finds himself caught into. So we'll kind of look at the cases in both directions, right? Like what this might look like for Eberflus to be on the hot seat. Like what would have to happen for that to really play out that way over the course of the season? And also what would have to happen this season for him to win NFL Coach of the Year? And then we'll kind of come back in the middle somewhere of like, okay, where does Matt Eberflus actually stand from a job security standpoint, and why it sure feels to me like it would take a disaster or something really to go off the rails this season for Eberflus to actually lose his job. Because I think last offseason was kind of a pivotal point in this situation, and I think you're going to find a lot more people who lean towards Eberflus more on the Coach of the Year candidate side than the hot seat side. But in case you think this is some kind of straw man argument, like this actually came up because I was looking around and, keeping up on the latest Bears news and what people are writing about the team. And I looked with our friends at Bleacher Report, and there was an article from Bleacher Report out over the weekend that was NFL coaches on the hot seat before the 2024 season starts, written by Alex K over there at Bleacher Report. I don't know Alex, but just giving him proper credit for his article here. And one of the names on that list is, of course, Matt Eberflus. And, in the article, he goes on to talk about how, it was a rocky start to Matt Eberflus's tenure in Chicago. And then, of course, they started to turn things around. But Chicago's ownership made it clear last year that the results were unacceptable. And, right, they changed the coordinators as sort of a sign of like, hey, this is not good yet. But, like, if he fails to deliver, that they could potentially look at a regime change in Chicago. So you do get, like, legitimately arguments for Eberflus on the hot seat. And then on the other side of the spectrum, our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook put out their odds for Coach of the Year this year. And Matt Eberflus is tied for the best odds with Raheem Morris of the Atlanta Falcons. They're both plus 1,000 on the betting odds for AP NFL regular season Coach of the Year 2024-2025. Just ahead of D'Amico Ryans of the Texans, Shane Steichen of the Indianapolis Colts, Jonathan Gannon of the Arizona Cardinals, and Jim Harbaugh of the Los Angeles Chargers, all tied for, I guess that would be third in the odds. But it's Eberflus and Morris are the betting favorites for Coach of the Year. So simultaneously, odds makers think Matt Eberflus has the best chances to win NFL Coach of the Year, and other people think Matt Eberflus is on the hot seat. And it's kind of cognitive dissonance that those things shouldn't be able to happen at the same time. And it's funny, it speaks to how we analyze this sport, right? That we're always looking at the extremes, right? Everyone's always trying to paint, everyone is either a great coach or should be fired, and there's no in between. And I tend to think, generally speaking, Matt Eberflus is probably somewhere in between great coach and horrible coach. I think he might just be an average coach, and that's fine. But there certainly is a path towards NFL Coach of the Year, right? When you have a new offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron who's been successful with less than stellar quarterbacks in the past in Seattle and has been able to operate an offense effectively, especially when he has good wide receivers. And then the Bears give him good wide receivers in DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze. You've got three guys that feel capable of being 1,000-yard receivers, plus the number one overall pick at quarterback with loads of potential that even the Bears scouts say could be a top 5 quarterback someday, plus, a good running back room, some solid depth at tight end, and they've added pieces on the offensive line. And then, of course, a defense that was playing lights out at the end of last season that kept a lot of the same pieces intact. Still have some pass rush questions there, but the back seven is, as the Bears defensive coordinator said, as good as any in the NFL. Like, you can piece together how this all happens, right? They come out strong against the Tennessee Titans. Maybe they give the Texans a run for their money. They go from being a 7-win team last season. They cruise through some of that easier part of their schedule. They get to that tough part of their schedule where it's a lot of NFC North teams, and they get the 49ers in there at some point. And maybe they win a couple of games that maybe they weren't supposed to. Or maybe they push Green Bay and give them a run for the money and split that series. Maybe they beat the Lions once or even twice, as close as they came to beating the Lions twice last season. And maybe they make easy work of the Minnesota Vikings, and the Bears get to say 10-7 it is now, or 11-6. And I don't know if that wins the NFC North or however the Lions get, but maybe they're a playoff team then at that point, and they make this big jump up in production and competition, and all of a sudden, Matt Eberflus is the orchestrator of all that. And I think when it comes to like Coach of the Year voting, right, it's the Associated Press, so it's writers and analysts voting, and I think there's something to be said about a lingering effect of last season of like, okay, if they started to get hot last year and then they continue that through this year, like I think in the voters' minds, Eberflus might get some credit for that, because I think in the back of their mind, there's sort of this feeling like he was starting to turn things around, and like that sort of builds up to this as opposed to like coming completely out of nowhere. I think there's something to be said about the idea already being planted in their mind that he's a strong candidate to kind of elevate this team forward a little bit more. And, obviously other coaches are going to be in the mix there. And, I guess Raheem Morris from the Falcons is kind of the favorite there, or the other favorite tied with Eberflus, because he's got Kirk Cousins and some young players there, but they also drafted Michael Penix, and things are certainly weird there. But a lot of it's going to come down to, how that offense operates with their quarterback and their new QB and new offensive coordinator, how the Bears offense operates with its new QB and its new offensive coordinator. But it's not hard to get to this point, right, where Caleb Williams throws for 4,000 yards and the Bears have a top 15 offense and a top 15 defense, maybe top 10 in both categories, and make a strong push into the playoffs. And maybe they don't go to the championship game with a Super Bowl or anything, but they make a little bit of noise. And you're left feeling like, man, all right, everything came together really nicely for this Bears team. They'll go into 2025 and be able to take like another step forward and keep that success going. And boom, Matt Eberflus is your coach of the year. And you look back and say, man, that hot seat talk in the offseason was not warranted and was ridiculous, or however you end up wanting to feel about it at that point in the process. Now, that being said, I don't think it's ridiculous or outlandish to consider the idea of Matt Eberflus on the hot seat. I think in practice, I wouldn't call it the hot seat per se, but it's not as though his job is 100% safe. 5 months ago, certainly was sitting on rocky ground, and we weren't sure whether or not he was even going to be back as the Bears head coach. So we'll look at like what that hot seat might feel like. That at best, I would say like lukewarm at this point. But we'll kind of look at what a hot seat scenario might look like if things were to go poorly for Matt Eberflus and the Chicago Bears next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I use Gametime all the time. I used it to buy Bears games tickets last season. I buy all my concert tickets through Gametime. It's such an easy ticket buying experience, and I can't recommend it enough, especially if you're looking at this Bears schedule and trying to get some tickets here, because Gametime lets you see your view from your seat in the stadium. So you know exactly what you're going to get with your tickets, and you know exactly how much you're going to pay, because Gametime has all-in pricing, so you're not getting any of those added fees at the end of the process that all of a sudden your tickets cost way more than you thought they would. Plus, some last-minute deals can really help you get tickets just at the nick of time to make sure you get to enjoy the event in your area. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Matt Eberflus might not be on the hottest seat of any coach this offseason, but I think there's some validity to some level of heat underneath his seat, right? I mean, it's not hot, but it's not ice cold either, because like the article from Bleacher Report that we mentioned earlier, I mean, it makes some valid points, and it's easy to forget with all the excitement about Caleb Williams where we were not long ago. I mean, when this team started 0-4 last season in year 2 of Matt Eberflus, and it felt like the coaching was a disaster, your defensive coordinator had been fired, your offensive coordinator was failing, you were failing Justin Fields, your team was falling apart, and the Chase Claypool situation had been a disaster up to that point. Like, you didn't have a pass rush or anything. Like, Eberflus looked like he was destined to be fired. It was a matter of when, not if, at that point in the process. Of course, they end up turning things around over the course of the season and get to 7 wins when it's all said and done. But we even go into the last offseason, January, and it took, wasn't it a couple of weeks? I don't want to exaggerate that amount of time. It was at least a week, maybe closer to 10 days than 2 weeks. But like, there was a period of time where other teams were firing their head coaches, and other teams were coming out and saying, our coach is back for next season. And now, team announced that coach will return for 2024 season, or team announced that they'd fired the coach. And the Bears were silent for, again, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 14 days. I don't remember the exact period in January. They were doing exit interviews and kind of contemplating their future. And we were all kind of waiting around saying, the Bears are going to fire Matt Eberflus? Like, is this head coaching change going to happen? I certainly was someone who was in favor of firing Matt Eberflus last offseason. I still think in the long term, that may have been the best decision for the franchise when you were starting things over with Caleb Williams, but that's sort of beside the point at this moment. But the point being that there were legitimate discussions 5 months ago in January about the Bears firing Matt Eberflus. Like, we are not very far removed. The Bears have not played any football games since seriously considering firing their head coach. Instead, they fired both coordinators and made it very, very clear in that press conference that what the Bears had done in the first 2 seasons under Matt Eberflus was not good enough, was not acceptable, and needed to be better. And that they felt like they didn't want to disrupt the chemistry of the organization, the continuity. They wanted to keep things together and expressed confidence in Matt Eberflus's ability to lead the team, but evidently not confidence in his ability to have picked coordinators, because they fired both Luke Getsy and, of course, Alan Williams had already been separated from the team, we'll say, early in last season. But it doesn't feel like a good look when your head coach is replacing both of his coordinators, not because they got hired away to be head coaches, right? It's a great look if your OC gets hired to be a head coach somewhere else and your DC gets, if you lose your coach because they got a better opportunity elsewhere, that's a different story. But essentially, when you fired both of your coordinators for on-field and maybe off-field reasons with Alan Williams, we still don't know what happened with Alan Williams, it was not a good reflection of Matt Eberflus's ability to hire coordinators and assistant coaches. And as a result, the buck stops with Matt Eberflus. Everything falls on his shoulders, and it was not a good reflection of Matt Eberflus. The last couple of seasons have had mixed reflections of Matt Eberflus. Certainly, I think there's some evidence that the locker room is bonding well and has a good culture and stuff, and that players like each other and get along well, and that there's not that much trouble in the locker room. There's some evidence that this idea of the hits principle is having some impact. Tyreek Stevenson just talked on a podcast the other day about how, like, he wasn't hustling to the ball at practice, and they made him sit out of practice for a few days and missed out his reps because they were really serious about holding him to that, and he hustles more now as a result. Like, sure, there is evidence of things Matt Eberflus has done well, but it's not as though Eberflus is a tactician of a head coach, right? This is not the guy who's giving you a schematic advantage over your opponents, the way that Sean McVay does for the Los Angeles Rams, or Kyle Shanahan does for the San Francisco 49ers, or even now Mike McDonald with the Seattle Seahawks, when he was the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator. Like, there was a certain schematic advantage where he was innovative, cutting-edge play calling, whether offense or defense. Matt Eberflus is not that guy. It's not to say he's not a smart defensive schemer. It's not like he's, getting lapped by the rest of the NFL, but he's just not a difference maker. We don't see Matt Eberflus pulling out these creative schemes and ways to attack opposing offenses that you're like, wow, Like what a genius play calling game that Eberflus had. He's a fine defensive coordinator, perhaps, but like nothing too special there. So then his value to the team is in that leadership, and then it's got to be also then the coordinators he's picked. And again, the last two coordinators he picked did not work out so well. He gets another chance to pick these coordinators, and I think a lot of his success and job security will depend on especially how offensive coordinator Shane Waldron does, but defensive coordinator Eric Washington plays a role in that as well. And you can see where if last season's results weren't acceptable, even though they got to 7-10, but certainly the way they got there was with a lot of issues along the way, then you have to be better this season. And what if you're not? What if Caleb Williams makes some mistakes and it takes him a second? And you know what? Rookie quarterbacks can't all be CJ Stroud. It's very normal for a rookie quarterback we talked about this a couple weeks ago on the podcast after they drafted Caleb. We talked about setting expectations for Caleb Williams' rookie season and compared him to other recent rookie quarterbacks. And most highly drafted quarterbacks tend to have their highest number of interceptions in their rookie season, their lowest completion percentage of their careers in their rookie seasons. Understandable. Like, this sounds obvious, but I think it's important to state it out loud. Like, this year will likely be the worst season of Caleb Williams' career. Like, if he's going to pan out to be great or even good, this is going to be the worst season of his career. It could still be a very nice season, but over the course of his career, we will most likely look back and say rookie Caleb Williams was the worst form of Caleb Williams throughout his career. And so that could mean extra fumbles, extra interceptions, extra sacks, poor decisions at times. And that can lead to losing more games or losing games you shouldn't have, or losing games that you should have been able to win, and losing games that you had in hand, right? Like, it's not to say that Caleb is going to be this big problem or anything, but I think we instantly assume he's going to be great and be perfect and not make mistakes. And it's like, if Caleb makes some mistakes and maybe you don't add another pass rusher and your pass rush is limited and your defense takes a little bit of a step back because Montez Sweat can't do it all by himself, and maybe there's a key injury somewhere or a couple places, and maybe this Bears team wins 7 games. I mean, maybe the Packers take a big step forward, the Lions take a big step forward, so you struggle with them, and maybe you split with the Vikings, and then you've got some playoff teams on your schedule like the Texans and the 49ers, and I guess the Seahawks didn't quite make the playoffs, but a handful of playoff teams across the schedule that you might lose to, and maybe, I don't know, if you finish 7-10 again this season, like, that's the same result as the year before, and the Bears just told us that these results are unacceptable. Or if the Bears, if we figure out pretty quickly during the season that somehow Shane Waldron is just not the right offensive coordinator, this offense can't get out of first gear despite all the weapons that they have, and then that reflects poorly on Matt Eberflus having selected him, like, you can start to see where the Bears maybe realize, okay, we've given this coaching staff all this talent. Ryan Poles can look at the receivers, the tight ends, the running backs, the secondary, the linebackers, Montez Sweat, like, this team has all this talent, and if they're still underachieving, then what's left as the issue if not coaching? And then they say maybe, well, the right coach could take this good roster and put it over the top and then get Caleb on the right track. Like, that's how you get to this Matt Eberflus hot seat conversation. Now, again, I think the chances of Matt Eberflus being fired in the next 12 months is low. I think it would take a pretty horrific disaster, and even a 500, or I guess they can't finish 500 anymore, but even a middle of the road season, I don't think would get Matt Eberflus fired. But I do want to dive in a little bit more specifically on what this middle ground looks like and where exactly Matt Eberflus's job security stands next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you can bet $5 on anything on FanDuel, the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, baseball season, golf tournaments, you name it, they've got it all. If your bet is correct, you'll get your winnings for that $5 bet and $150 in bonus bets added right to your account that you can use to bet on anything. You can bet on Matt Eberflus as coach of the year, like we talked about. You can bet on Caleb Williams as offensive rookie of the year, over under passing yards and receiving yards for Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, and so much more. So to claim your $150 in bonus bucks, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I don't believe Matt Eberflus is on the hot seat, or on a super hot seat. I don't think Matt Eberflus is likely to be fired this season or after this season. I think it would take a real disaster for that to happen. I also don't think, personally, I would bet on him being coach of the year. I do think, maybe this is a slightly separate conversation, but I think the Bears are more likely to go from like 7-10 to 10-7, which is like a nice step forward. But I don't know if the Bears this year are going to make that jump to coach of the year. Like usually it's the team that goes like 12 wins, 13 wins from one year, goes up to that level. Like you really have to make a big jump. And it's a little bit hard for me to see the Bears do that also in the Bears, in Caleb Williams' rookie season. So that's where I find him somewhere in the middle. Like I think his job is safe unless things really go bad, like we talked about. Like if they somehow win fewer games than last season, which feels almost impossible, right? Like it's hard to even like talk through what that scenario would look like. But okay, you get the Texans, the Colts, the Rams, the Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, the 49ers, maybe the Lions again, the Packers again. Like that's 9 losses I've just said right there. And then you'd still have to lose to a couple other teams that you feel like the Jaguars or the Seahawks. I mean, it would be hard. It feels like it would take if Caleb Williams got hurt, right? And you had to start Tyson Bagent all season. I mean, something like that. And then even then, are you firing your coach? Probably not. Like, it's hard to envision a scenario where things go bad in just the right way that you blame Matt Eberflus entirely and fire him. So I think his job security falls somewhere in the middle there, where it's like, okay, you got to do at least 7 wins probably. Like, you got to show some real improvement here, but like, you don't got to be coach of the year either, right? Like, I think so much of what this is going to come down to for him is what his coordinators do. But I think the fact that he got new coordinators and a rookie quarterback added to his job security. Like, if they were going to fire Matt Eberflus, they would have done it this year, because even like this offseason, because I think even at the time when they were making those coaching decisions, they still had a pretty good sense that they were going to draft a rookie quarterback. Maybe they weren't 100% sure yet, but even like Justin Fields said, we heard from him last week on the podcast, that he felt like he could tell at his exit interview when he was meeting with Ryan Poles right after the season, he got the sense from their body language and the way they talked that they were planning on drafting a quarterback. And so when they made the decision to keep Matt Eberflus and fire their coordinators, they likely had a pretty good sense, maybe not 100%, but a pretty good sense that they were going to draft a rookie quarterback. And so they made their head coaching decision knowing that they would be drafting a rookie quarterback. And if you decide, okay, this is the coach that we're going to have coach our rookie quarterback, then there's a certain expectation that unless something major happens, you want to have that continuity throughout that young quarterback's first handful of seasons at a minimum, right? Obviously forever, ideally, or for the rest of his career, you'd like to have the same continuity, but at a minimum, you want to get a couple of years of like stability and, settling into good habits and being able to ride that out. So like, if they knew that they were going to draft a rookie quarterback and knew that they would want that stability with that rookie quarterback, then that's saying we're keeping Matt Eberflus with the idea that it's not like a 1-year trial and we'll see if he can keep his job from year to year. But no, we're keeping him because we want him to be here for a few more years. And that's why I still felt like this would have been the time to change coaches, because now it's not a good time to change coaches for the next couple of seasons. So if you were going to do it, this was the time to do it. And now I think it would take something really extreme to change their minds on Matt Eberflus. I mean, it would take more coordinators getting arrested. No coordinators have been arrested. I should be very clear on that. As far as we know, there was not we've never been able to confirm any reports of a coordinator being arrested, but it would take something like that, right? Like some bad stuff would have to come out for Eberflus to be fired. But I should be careful with my language there. There were only unfounded allegations of a potential raid of Hallis Hall that no one was ever able to confirm. So no one was arrested. No one's been charged with a crime as far as we know yet. So that's where that stands. But I do think like long-term, Eberflus's job security comes down to how good Shane Waldron is as an offensive coordinator, and to a lesser extent, what Eric Washington can provide as a defensive coordinator. Because like we said, Matt Eberflus is not the tactician type. It's the leadership type. So as long as the locker room stays together and the culture is there, which seems to be something he's doing pretty well, then like that's the main part he can control. And then it's a matter of, did you get the coordinator hire right this time? And if Waldron's the right guy, then Eberflus will be set for a few years. And then if Waldron really is the right guy, he might get hired away as a head coach after a couple of seasons. And then Eberflus has got to find another offensive coordinator, and Eberflus's job then might be tied to that offensive coordinator at that point. And that's how you get to the Lovie Smith conundrum of like, okay, defensive head coach with offensive coordinator, and how that relationship goes ends up deciding how long the coach ends up staying there. But that's all super far down the line. The important thing was like, somehow this coach is a favorite for coach of the year and on the hot seat. And I think if he's being considered on both ends of the extreme spectrum here, then the reality tends to be as close to the middle then as possible. So we're not going to get too sucked up in the hype for coach of the year and the pitchforks for the hot seat. And we'll say, you know what? Matt Eberflus might just be an average head coach. But if you give an average head coach a good roster and a great quarterback and a solid defense and some strong wide receivers, like, you can go pretty darn far there. And, if there's a ceiling there, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But let's get to that ceiling before we decide to have to cross that bridge. And I think, like it or not, we are rolling with Matt Eberflus for all of this season and likely all of next season. And then from there, we'll start to have that conversation again. But for now, he's not really on the hot seat. And I don't think he's a strong choice for coach of the year, but we'll certainly keep our eye on how this season plays out. And the exciting part is that you've got all these different possibilities for how this year could go for your Chicago Bears. That's why it's so fun to break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are in the off season. We're still getting OTAs and minicamp updates every so often. So, as we go through this process, we'll keep you up to date there. We're not going anywhere. We're still going to be here with your daily Bears news and analysis. Eventually, we'll slow down in like the end of June into July a little bit. But hey, I always want to make sure that after a nice Memorial Day weekend, you're back into the swing of your work week, that I'm still going to make sure you find some time to bear down.